The phone screen lit up at 2 in the morning, and Grace Whitfield's hand froze over it before she even touched the glass. She had been half asleep, the kind of sleep where the mind still listens for footsteps in the hallway, for the soft click of a door. Daniel was not beside her. His side of the bed was cold, the sheet pulled tight and untouched. She sat up slowly, her heart already racing, before her mind understood why. The message on the screen was from a name she did not know. Vanessa Cole. 3 words glowed back at her in the dark. Miss you already. Grace read it twice, then a third time. The room around her felt suddenly unfamiliar, as if the walls she had lived inside for 18 years had shifted an inch to the left. She looked at the closet where Daniel's shirts hung in neat rows, at the framed photograph on the dresser of their wedding day, at the small wooden cross Daniel's mother had given them the year Noah was born. None of it looked the same anymore. She did not cry. Not yet. She sat very still, holding the phone the way a person holds a small animal that has just bitten them, unsure whether to let go or hold on tighter. Downstairs, a door opened. Grace heard keys drop onto the kitchen counter, heard the refrigerator hum as it always did, heard Daniel's footsteps climb the stairs with the careless rhythm of a man who believed himself unseen. She placed the phone face down on the nightstand and waited. When he entered the room, he smelled of a perfume that was not hers. Something sweet and expensive, clinging to his collar like a signature. He undressed in the dark, careful not to wake her, thinking his secret was still safe, thinking that 18 years of trust could not be broken by one message glowing in the night. "Who is Vanessa Cole?" Grace asked, and her voice did not shake, even though every part of her chest felt as if it were collapsing inward. Daniel stopped moving. For a long moment he said nothing, and in that silence, Grace understood more than any explanation could have told her. Silence, she would later think, was the loudest confession a man could give. "Grace," he finally said, sitting on the edge of the bed with his back to her. "We need to talk." Those 4 words. She had heard them before, in small arguments about money or in tired evenings after long days, but never like this, never with this particular weight, as if he were setting down a heavy box he had been carrying for a long time and did not want to carry anymore. "Who is she?" Grace repeated, and this time her voice cracked just slightly, betraying her. Daniel turned to face her. In the pale light of the phone's glow, his face looked older than she remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "She's someone I met at work," he said. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." He hesitated, and Grace watched the hesitation, the way one watches weather change before a storm, knowing exactly what is coming and unable to stop it. "I've been seeing her," he said at last. "For a few months now." The words landed like something physical, a stone dropped from a great height. Grace felt her hands go cold. Outside their window, the street was silent, the neighborhood asleep, unaware that inside this one house, a marriage was ending in real time. 18 years, Grace said quietly. 18 years, Daniel. And you tell me this at 2 in the morning, because I happened to see her name on your phone. "I was going to tell you," he said, though even he did not sound convinced by his own words. "When, after the wedding invitation arrived?" He did not answer that. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at nothing in particular, the way people do when they cannot look at the person they have wounded. "I haven't been happy for a long time, Grace," he said. "I don't say this to hurt you, but something has been missing, and when I met Vanessa, I felt something I hadn't felt in years." Grace sat in the darkness and let the sentence settle over her like ash. Something missing. As if 18 years of raising 2 children together, of building a home, of standing beside each other through illness and loss, and every ordinary Tuesday in between, had simply been a placeholder for something better that was still to come. "What about Ellie? What about Noah?" she asked. Their daughter was 16, their son 14, both asleep down the hallway, unaware that their world was quietly cracking apart while they dreamed. "They'll understand eventually," Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Children are more resilient than we think." Grace almost laughed, though nothing about this was funny. She thought of Ellie's science project sitting half-finished on the kitchen table, of Noah's soccer game next weekend that Daniel had promised to attend, of 1,000 small daily threads that held a family together, threads Daniel seemed willing to cut without a second thought. "How long?" she asked again, needing to know the shape of her own betrayal. "Have you been lying to me?" Daniel exhaled slowly. 6 months, he admitted, maybe a little more. 6 months. Grace tried to count backward, to remember which nights he claimed to be working late, which weekends he said he had business trips, which small absences she had explained away, because trust does not question itself until it is given a reason to. She had given him none. He had needed none. "I want a divorce," Daniel said, and though he had clearly rehearsed the sentence, it still came out clumsy, unpracticed, in the way that even guilty men sometimes stumble over the truth. Grace looked at him for a long moment, memorizing his face in this new light, the face of a stranger, wearing her husband's features. "You're choosing her," she said. It was not a question. "I'm choosing happiness," Daniel replied, and something about the way he said it, so certain, so untouched by the wreckage he was creating, made Grace finally understand that the man she had married had quietly disappeared somewhere along the way, replaced by someone she no longer recognized. The rest of that night passed in fragments. Daniel slept in the guest room, or pretended to. Grace lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every year of her marriage, searching for the exact moment when the foundation had begun to crack without her noticing. She thought of the early years, when Daniel used to come home just to see her smile, when he memorized her coffee order without being asked, when he cried quietly at the hospital the day Ellie was born. Where had that man gone? When had he started slipping away? By morning, the house smelled of coffee and pretend normalcy. Daniel left early, claiming a meeting, though Grace now understood that every excuse he had ever given carried a shadow she had never thought to look for. She made breakfast for the children, as if nothing had happened, watching Ellie scroll through her phone at the table, watching Noah wolf down his cereal before soccer practice, and she said nothing, because how does a mother tell her children that their family, as they know it, is about to end? That evening, after the children were in bed, Grace sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She opened her laptop and, almost without meaning to, searched the name that had haunted her since 2 a.m, Vanessa Cole. The search results loaded slowly, as if even the internet understood the weight of what she was about to see. A social media profile appeared first. Photographs of a woman, perhaps 10 years younger than Grace, dressed in clothes that looked as though they were tailored specifically for confidence, her smile wide and practiced, her life displayed in curated moments of parties, vacations, and expensive dinners. Grace scrolled slowly, feeling something twist in her stomach with each new image. In one recent photograph, taken only weeks earlier, Vanessa stood on a balcony overlooking the city, a glass of wine in her hand, laughing at something outside the frame. And just visible at the edge of the picture, cropped but not entirely hidden, was the sleeve of a gray jacket Grace recognized immediately. She had bought that jacket for Daniel's birthday 2 years ago. She closed the laptop and sat in silence, the kitchen clock ticking loudly in the quiet house. Somewhere above her, her children slept peacefully, unaware that their father had already begun building a life apart from them. A life with a stranger's face and a stranger's laugh. A life that had no room in it, it seemed, for the family he was leaving behind. Grace did not know yet how the coming months would unfold, did not know how deeply her children would come to feel this betrayal, did not know that the woman in those photographs would one day become someone her children despised more than they had ever despised anyone. All she knew, in that quiet, aching moment, was that the life she had built for 18 years had ended in the space of a single night. Ended, not with an explosion, but with a whispered confession, and a stranger's name, glowing on a phone screen in the dark. Outside, the world continued, as if nothing had changed. Streetlights hummed, a dog barked somewhere in the distance, and Grace Whitfield sat alone in her kitchen, holding the shattered pieces of her marriage, gathering the quiet strength she did not yet know she would need, for everything that was still to come. The knock on the door came sharp and urgent, 3 quick raps that pulled Ellie away from her homework, and sent her running down the stairs, before her mother could reach it first. It was Karen Blake, Grace's closest friend since college, standing on the porch, with an overnight bag slung over her shoulder, and a look on her face that told Ellie something was very wrong. "Where's your mom, sweetheart?" Karen asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Grace appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes red-rimmed, but her posture straight, the posture of a woman determined not to fall apart in front of her children. "I called her," Grace said simply, meeting Ellie's confused gaze. "I needed someone here." It had been 3 days since the confession in the dark bedroom, 3 days of Daniel sleeping in the guest room and leaving early, avoiding eye contact, speaking to his children in short, distracted sentences. Ellie had noticed the tension immediately, the way teenagers notice everything, even when adults believe they are hiding it well. Noah, younger and more easily distracted, had not yet caught on, still consumed by soccer practice and video games and the ordinary concerns of a 14-year-old boy. But that evening, Daniel came home early, and the moment he stepped through the door, something in his posture told Grace this was the night he intended to make everything official. He asked the children to sit in the living room. Karen quietly excused herself to the kitchen, close enough to listen, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. "Your mother and I have something important to tell you," Daniel began, and Ellie felt her stomach drop immediately, because parents who begin sentences this way rarely follow them with good news. "We're getting a divorce," he said, and though he had clearly practiced the words, they still landed with the clumsy weight of something rehearsed too many times and believed too little. Noah's face went pale. Ellie, older and sharper, narrowed her eyes at her father with a suspicion that seemed to arrive fully formed, as if some part of her had already suspected something was wrong long before this moment. "Why?" Noah asked quietly, his voice smaller than his 14 years usually allowed. Daniel glanced at Grace, silently asking her to help carry this burden, but Grace said nothing, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on her husband with an expression that made it clear she would not soften this blow for him. "Sometimes people grow apart," Daniel said carefully. "Your mother and I love you both very much, but we've decided it's best if we live separately." "Is there someone else?" Ellie asked, the question sharp and direct, cutting through her father's careful phrasing like a blade through paper. The silence that followed answered the question more completely than any words could have. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked at his daughter, searching for some gentler way to phrase the truth, but found none. "Her name is Vanessa," he admitted quietly. "I've been seeing her for a while now." Noah's eyes filled with tears immediately, the raw honesty of a child too young to disguise his heartbreak. Ellie, however, did not cry. She sat very still, her hands clenched in her lap, staring at her father with an expression that made Grace's chest ache, with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride at her daughter's strength, sorrow that a 16-year-old should ever need such strength at all. "How long?" Ellie asked, echoing almost exactly the question her mother had asked 3 nights earlier. "Ellie, it's complicated," Daniel began. "How long?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. 6 months, Daniel admitted, and Ellie let out a short, bitter breath, the sound of a laugh that held no humor in it at all. "So while we were at Grandma's funeral," Ellie said slowly, piecing together a timeline with the sharp clarity of a mind that refused to look away from painful truths, "you were with her." Daniel did not answer, and his silence, once again, said more than words ever could have. Noah stood suddenly, his young face twisted with a hurt too large for his small frame to contain. "I don't want you to leave," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, Dad, don't go." Daniel moved toward his son, arms outstretched. But Noah stepped back, confused and frightened, caught between the instinct to run toward his father and the instinct to protect himself from further pain. Grace crossed the room quickly and pulled her son into her arms, instead, holding him as he cried against her shoulder, her own eyes filling with tears she had promised herself she would not shed in front of her children. Ellie remained seated, watching the scene with an expression that had hardened somewhere in the last few minutes into something colder, something more resolute. She looked at her father, really looked at him, as if trying to memorize the exact moment their relationship changed forever. "You didn't leave because you stopped loving us," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else in the room. "You left because you found someone prettier." "Ellie, that's not fair," Daniel said, though even he seemed to hear the hollowness in his own defense. "Isn't it?" Ellie stood, brushing past her father toward the stairs. "You didn't even wait until we finished school this year. You didn't even wait until things were less messy. You just left because you wanted something better than us." "That's not true," Daniel said, though his voice lacked the conviction needed to make anyone believe him, including himself. Ellie paused at the bottom of the stairs and turned back one final time. "I hope she was worth it," she said, and then she disappeared up the staircase, her bedroom door closing with a soft click that somehow felt louder than any slam could have been. In the kitchen, Karen finally emerged, her face pale with the second-hand pain of witnessing a family break apart in real time. She moved to Grace's side, helping steady Noah as he continued to cry, offering silent support in the only way she knew how. Daniel stood alone in the middle of the living room, surrounded by family photographs on the walls, images of birthdays and vacations and quiet Sunday mornings, evidence of a life he was choosing to abandon. He looked lost, momentarily, as if the reality of what he had just done was only now beginning to settle into his understanding. "You should go," Grace said quietly, not unkindly, simply stating a fact. "I think we all need some time." Daniel nodded slowly, gathering a jacket from the hallway closet, pausing at the front door as if waiting for someone to stop him, to tell him this was all a misunderstanding, to offer him some path back to the life he was leaving behind. No one did. The door closed softly behind him, and the house fell into a silence that felt different from any silence Grace had known before, heavier somehow, permanent, in a way that made her realize the life she had built inside these walls had truly, finally ended. Later that night, after Noah had cried himself to sleep and Karen had made up the guest bed to stay for as long as she was needed, Grace climbed the stairs and knocked gently on Ellie's door. There was no answer, so she pushed it open slowly and found her daughter sitting on the floor beside her bed, knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the wall. "Can I sit with you?" Grace asked softly. Ellie nodded without speaking, and Grace lowered herself to the floor beside her daughter, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. For a long while, neither of them spoke, the silence between them filled with a grief too large for words. "I hate him," Ellie finally whispered, her voice raw and broken. "I hate him so much." Grace pulled her daughter closer, resting her chin gently on the top of Ellie's head. "I know," she said softly. "I know, sweetheart." But even as she said it, some quiet part of Grace understood that hate, however justified, was a heavy thing to carry, and she worried, in that moment, about the weight her children would now have to bear, a weight their father had placed upon them, the moment he chose beauty and excitement over the family that had loved him unconditionally for so many years. Outside, the evening deepened into night, and inside the Whitfield house, three broken hearts began the long, uncertain process of learning how to heal, unaware that the coming months would bring even harder truths, and that the woman named Vanessa Cole, whose name had shattered their family in an instant, would soon become a name they could barely stand to hear spoken aloud. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and expensive candles, a scent so different from the home Daniel had left behind that he sometimes forgot, for entire minutes at a time, the life he had walked away from. Vanessa Cole moved through the space with the confidence of someone who had chosen every object carefully, from the modern glass table in the dining area to the abstract painting hanging above the fireplace that Daniel still did not fully understand, but had learned to praise whenever she mentioned it. She was, in every visible way, exactly the woman he had imagined during those long months of secret meetings and stolen evenings, elegant and effortless, always dressed as though a photographer might arrive at any moment. "You seem distracted," Vanessa said one evening, setting down 2 glasses of wine on the glass table and settling onto the couch beside him. "Is everything all right?" Daniel forced a smile. "Just thinking about work," he lied, though the truth was far heavier than any spreadsheet or meeting could account for. He had been thinking about Noah's soccer game that afternoon, the one he had promised to attend weeks earlier, the one he had missed because Vanessa wanted to visit a new restaurant that had just opened downtown. "You should relax more," Vanessa said, resting her head against his shoulder. "That's the whole point of this, isn't it? A fresh start, no more stress, no more obligations weighing you down." Daniel nodded, though something about the phrase "obligations weighing you down" settled uncomfortably in his chest, as if his children had somehow become items on a burden list rather than the 2 people who had once run to greet him at the door every evening after work. The following weekend, Daniel arranged to pick up Noah and Ellie for their first scheduled visit to his new apartment. Grace had agreed to it reluctantly, more for the children's sake than for any warmth she still held toward her former husband. She stood at the doorway as they climbed into Daniel's car, watching Ellie's stiff posture and Noah's downcast eyes, and felt a familiar ache settle into her chest. The drive to the apartment was mostly silent. Daniel attempted small talk about school and sports, but his children answered in short, guarded sentences, their responses carrying none of the warmth they once offered so freely. When they arrived, Vanessa greeted them at the door with a wide smile and an enthusiasm that felt, to Ellie at least, entirely performative. "I'm so excited to finally meet you both properly," Vanessa said, clasping her hands together. "I've heard so much about you." Ellie offered a tight, polite smile and said nothing. Noah mumbled a quiet hello before slipping past her into the apartment, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar space with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Vanessa had prepared what she clearly believed was an impressive spread of snacks, foods she had researched as popular among teenagers, though her selections felt slightly off, as if assembled from an internet search rather than genuine familiarity with the children she was trying to impress. Ellie picked at a plate of imported cheese and crackers without much interest, while Noah sat quietly on the edge of the couch, glancing occasionally at his father as if searching for some sign of the man he used to know. "So," Vanessa said, settling into an armchair across from the children, "your dad tells me you're quite the artist, Ellie." "I paint sometimes," Ellie said flatly. "That's wonderful. I actually know a gallery owner downtown. Maybe sometime we could—" "I'm fine," Ellie interrupted, her tone polite but firm, closing the conversation before it could go any further. Vanessa's smile faltered only slightly, quickly recovering into practiced grace, though Daniel noticed the brief flash of frustration crossing her features. The afternoon continued in much the same fashion, Vanessa attempting conversation, the children responding with careful, minimal politeness, and Daniel caught uncomfortably in the middle, aware that neither side felt entirely at ease and unsure how to bridge the growing distance. Later, when Daniel drove the children back home, Noah finally broke the tense silence in the car. "Why does she talk like that?" he asked quietly. "Talk like what, buddy?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he already understood. "Like she's trying too hard," Noah said, staring out the window. "Like she doesn't actually mean anything she says." Daniel opened his mouth to defend Vanessa, but found, uncomfortably, that he had no immediate response. He glanced at Ellie in the rearview mirror, hoping perhaps she might offer some softer perspective, but his daughter simply stared out her own window, her jaw set, her silence louder than any accusation could have been. When they arrived home, Grace opened the door before Daniel even had a chance to knock, as if she had been watching for the car through the window the entire time. Noah rushed past his mother and disappeared upstairs without a word. Ellie lingered a moment longer at the doorway, turning back to face her father with an expression that carried more disappointment than anger now. "She's not even trying to actually know us," Ellie said quietly. "She's just performing for you." "That's not fair, Ellie," Daniel said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Maybe," Ellie replied, stepping past her father into the house. "But it's true." Daniel stood on the porch a moment longer, watching the door close gently in front of him, feeling, for the first time since he had left, a small crack of doubt beginning to form somewhere deep inside his certainty that he had made the right choice. Back at the apartment that evening, Vanessa poured 2 glasses of wine and settled beside him on the couch, her earlier enthusiasm now replaced with a quieter, more calculated tone. "They're a bit cold, aren't they?" she said, swirling the wine gently in her glass. "I suppose that's to be expected, given everything." "They'll come around," Daniel said, though the words felt more like a wish than a certainty. "Of course they will," Vanessa agreed smoothly. "Children adjust. It just takes patience." She paused, glancing at him sideways. "Though I do hope we won't need to plan our lives entirely around their schedules forever. We deserve some spontaneity too, don't we?" Daniel nodded slowly, though something about her words settled uneasily in his chest, a quiet suggestion that his children's presence in his new life might always be considered, at best, a scheduling inconvenience rather than a priority. Over the following weeks, this pattern repeated itself again and again. Visits were postponed for last-minute trips Vanessa had planned. Weekend plans were adjusted to fit dinner reservations she had already made. Slowly, without any single dramatic moment marking the shift, Daniel found himself missing more of his children's lives than he attended, each small absence justified individually, each one accumulating quietly into something much larger. Ellie noticed everything. She kept a mental record of missed calls, forgotten promises, and rescheduled visits, each entry adding weight to a growing certainty forming inside her, a certainty that her father had not simply chosen a new partner, but had chosen an entirely different life, one in which his children occupied a smaller and smaller corner. One evening, after yet another canceled visit, Ellie sat with her mother in the kitchen, watching Grace prepare dinner, with the same quiet steadiness she had maintained through every difficult moment of the past several weeks. "Do you think he'll always be like this now?" Ellie asked quietly. Grace paused, considering her answer carefully before speaking. "I think," she said slowly, "your father made a choice, and sometimes people don't fully understand the weight of a choice until much later. But we're the ones paying for it," Ellie said, her voice edged with a bitterness that felt both justified and, to Grace, heartbreakingly premature for someone so young. Grace set down the knife she had been using and turned to face her daughter fully. "You are allowed to be angry," she said softly, "but don't let that anger become who you are. Let it become the reason you choose differently one day." Ellie considered her mother's words in silence, watching the steady, quiet strength radiating from a woman who had every reason to collapse under the weight of betrayal, and yet somehow continued rising each morning, continued showing up, continued choosing her children above everything else, exactly the kind of choice their father had failed to make. That night, lying in bed, Ellie thought again of Vanessa's forced smile, of her father's hollow reassurances, of the widening gap between the family she had once known and the fractured arrangement now taking its place. Somewhere in that quiet darkness, a resolve began forming inside her, small and uncertain at first, but growing steadily with each passing day, a resolve that would, in time, shape decisions far more significant than either she or her father could yet imagine. The letter from the school arrived on a Tuesday, and Grace read it 3 times before she fully understood what it meant. Noah had been sent to the principal's office after a fight broke out during lunch, a rare occurrence for a boy who had always been gentle and easygoing. When Grace arrived at the school that afternoon, she found her son sitting outside the principal's office, his knuckles scraped, his eyes red from crying, his shoulders slumped in a posture of exhaustion far beyond his 14 years. He wouldn't stop talking about it, Noah explained later that evening, sitting across from his mother at the kitchen table, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and shame. "Some kid at school kept asking why my dad left, and then he said something about my dad having a new family now, and I just—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence, tears spilling down his cheeks. Grace reached across the table and took her son's hand. "You don't need to explain," she said gently. "I understand." "I'm not sorry," Noah said quietly, though his voice cracked with the effort of trying to sound braver than he felt. He shouldn't have said that. "I know," Grace said. "But fighting isn't going to make the pain go away, sweetheart. It's just going to give you more pain to carry." Noah nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve, and Grace felt her heart ache with a familiar, exhausting grief. The grief of watching her children absorb consequences for a decision they never made. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel's life had settled into an uneasy rhythm that felt, to him, increasingly difficult to sustain. Bills for the new apartment arrived alongside continued support payments for his children, and though he had once imagined his new life with Vanessa as effortless and glamorous, the financial reality of maintaining 2 households had begun to strain him in ways he had not anticipated. "We should look at a bigger place," Vanessa said one evening, scrolling through listings on her phone as they sat together after dinner. "This apartment is nice, but it's starting to feel small." Daniel glanced at the numbers on the listings she showed him, then thought of the modest support payments he sent to Grace each month, the ones that barely covered half of what raising 2 children truly cost. "Vanessa, things are tight right now," he said carefully. "Maybe we should hold off for a bit." Vanessa's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of impatience crossing her otherwise composed features. "I thought things were supposed to get easier," she said, "not harder." "They will," Daniel said, though he was beginning to feel less certain of his own reassurances each time he offered them. "It's just an adjustment period." "It's been months," Vanessa replied, setting her phone down with a soft click against the glass table. I didn't realize starting a new life together meant living like we're still tied to your old one. Daniel felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same tightness he had begun noticing more frequently in recent weeks, a quiet dread that had started to accompany conversations with Vanessa whenever money, or his children, or both, entered the discussion. "They're still my kids, Vanessa," he said quietly. "That doesn't change." "I never said it should," Vanessa replied smoothly, though something in her tone suggested otherwise. "I just think we deserve to build something for ourselves too, without constantly being pulled backward." Daniel said nothing further, though the conversation lingered in his mind long after Vanessa had moved on to discussing weekend plans with friends, plans that, once again, did not include his children. The following weekend, Ellie turned 17, and Grace planned a small celebration at home, inviting a handful of close friends and family. Daniel had promised weeks earlier that he would attend, arriving early enough to help set up, staying through the entire evening as a show of continued presence in his daughter's life. He arrived nearly 2 hours late, offering a hurried apology about traffic that Ellie recognized immediately as untrue. Vanessa had insisted on a spontaneous lunch with friends that ran longer than expected, and Daniel, unwilling to create tension at home, had simply gone along with the delay, rather than insisting they leave on time. By the time he arrived, the cake had already been cut, the candles already blown out, the small gathering of friends and family, already moving into quiet conversation around the living room. Ellie stood near the kitchen doorway, watching her father enter with a strained smile and an armful of gifts that felt, to her, like poor substitutes for the time he had already failed to give. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Daniel said, pulling his daughter into an awkward hug she did not fully return. "Thanks," Ellie said flatly, stepping back after only a brief moment. "I'm sorry I'm late," Daniel said. "Traffic was terrible." Ellie studied her father's face carefully, searching for some sign of honesty, finding none. "It's fine," she said, though her tone made clear it was anything but fine. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the house had grown quiet, Grace found Ellie sitting alone on the back porch, staring out at the darkened yard. "You okay?" Grace asked, settling into the chair beside her daughter. "He missed the whole thing," Ellie said quietly. "The candles, the singing, all of it. And he didn't even seem that sorry." Grace considered her words carefully before responding. "I think," she said slowly, "your father has started making choices that put someone else first, over and over again. And I think somewhere along the way, he stopped noticing how often that choice affects you and your brother." Ellie nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words in silence. "Do you think he even loves us anymore?" she asked quietly, her voice small and uncertain in a way that made Grace's chest tighten painfully. "I think he loves you," Grace said carefully, choosing her words with deliberate honesty. "But love isn't only about feeling something, it's about choosing someone, again and again, even when it's inconvenient. And I think your father has stopped choosing you as often as he should." Ellie absorbed this in silence, staring out at the dark yard, the quiet resentment that had been slowly building inside her over the past several months, hardening into something firmer, something closer to resolve. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Daniel sat alone on the couch long after Vanessa had gone to bed, staring at a photograph on his phone from years earlier, a picture of Ellie as a small girl, sitting on his shoulders at a summer festival, laughing with an unguarded joy he had not seen on her face in months. He scrolled through several more photographs, each one a quiet reminder of a closeness that seemed to be slipping further away with each passing week, each missed visit, each canceled promise. For a brief moment, something like regret stirred within him, a quiet recognition that the life he had chosen came with costs he had not fully anticipated. But the moment passed quickly, smoothed over by the comfortable rhythm of his new apartment, the expensive wine, the easy affection Vanessa offered whenever he needed reassurance that he had made the right choice. He set the phone aside and told himself, as he often did in these quiet moments of doubt, that things would improve, that his children would adjust in time, that the growing distance between them was simply a temporary phase, rather than the beginning of something far more permanent and far more difficult to repair. He did not yet understand how wrong he was. Winter arrived quietly that year, settling over the neighborhood in gray skies and early darkness, matching the mood that had slowly settled over the Whitfield household in the months since Daniel's departure. Grace had taken a part-time job at a local design studio, something she had abandoned years earlier when Ellie was born. And though the return to work felt strange at first, unfamiliar after so many years focused entirely on her family, she found an unexpected sense of purpose returning to her, piece by piece, with each project she completed. "You're good at this," her supervisor, a kind woman named Priya Malhotra, told her one afternoon, reviewing a set of layouts Grace had prepared. "Better than good, actually. Have you thought about taking on more clients?" Grace smiled, surprised by the small swell of pride the compliment brought her. "I hadn't really considered it," she admitted. "I've been a bit preoccupied lately." Priya nodded knowingly, aware in general terms of the difficult separation Grace had recently endured. "Well, when you're ready," she said. "There's plenty of room to grow here." Grace thanked her quietly, gathering her things at the end of the day, feeling a small but genuine sense of accomplishment that had been entirely absent from her life in recent months. It was strange, she thought, driving home through the darkening streets, how loss could sometimes open unexpected doors, how the collapse of one identity could slowly give rise to another, stronger one. At home, however, the atmosphere remained heavy with unresolved tension. Noah had grown increasingly withdrawn, spending most evenings alone in his room, his once cheerful disposition replaced by a quiet, guarded distance that worried Grace deeply. Ellie, meanwhile, had thrown herself into schoolwork and art with an intensity that seemed less like genuine passion and more like a deliberate strategy for avoiding painful thoughts. One evening, Grace knocked gently on Noah's door and found her son lying on his bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, his phone resting untouched beside him. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. "You've been pretty quiet lately. Want to talk about it?" Noah shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Nothing to talk about," he said quietly. "Noah," Grace said gently, "I know things have been really hard. It's okay to not be okay." Her son was silent for a long moment, and Grace waited patiently, learning over these past difficult months the importance of allowing silence its own space, rather than rushing to fill it. "I miss how things used to be," Noah finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I miss when Dad used to come to my games, and we'd get ice cream after, even if we lost. I miss when things felt normal." Grace felt her chest tighten with familiar grief, the particular ache of watching her son mourn a version of childhood that had been taken from him far too early. "I miss that too," she said softly, pulling her son into a gentle hug. "But I promise you, we're going to build something good again, even if it looks a little different than before." Noah nodded against her shoulder, though his tears soaked quietly into the fabric of her sweater, evidence of a grief that words alone could not fully soothe. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel's visits with his children had grown increasingly sporadic, each cancellation justified by some new development in his life with Vanessa, a work trip she had arranged for them, a social event she felt was too important to miss, a spontaneous weekend getaway that always seemed to take precedence over scheduled time with Noah and Ellie. One particularly cold evening in December, Daniel arrived to pick up the children for what was supposed to be their first holiday shopping trip together since the divorce, a tradition they had maintained every year of their childhood. He arrived nearly an hour late, his excuse this time involving a delayed flight from a business trip Vanessa had insisted they take together. Ellie stood at the door, coat already on, watching her father's car pull into the driveway, with an expression that had long since stopped registering surprise or disappointment, replaced instead by a weary, resigned acceptance of yet another broken promise. "Sorry I'm late," Daniel said, stepping out of the car with a rushed apology that had, by this point, become a familiar and hollow refrain. "It's fine," Ellie said, though her tone made clear that very little about the situation felt fine at all. "Noah's not feeling well. He's not coming." Daniel frowned, glancing toward the house. "Is he okay? Should I come in and check on him?" "He said he didn't want to see you today," Ellie said flatly, the words landing with quiet, deliberate weight. Daniel's expression faltered, a flicker of genuine hurt crossing his features. "Did something happen?" Ellie studied her father for a long moment before answering. "You missed his game again. she said quietly. The one you promised you'd be at no matter what. He waited by the window for almost an hour before he stopped checking. I told him I was sorry, Daniel said, his voice tightening with the discomfort of confronting a truth he had been avoiding. The flight got delayed, Ellie. It wasn't something I could control. You didn't have to go on the trip, Ellie replied simply. You chose to. Just like you keep choosing things that aren't us. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but found, once again, that he had no adequate defense to offer. He stood silently in the cold driveway, watching his daughter's expression harden further, watching the last remaining threads of patience she had extended toward him slowly begin to fray. Can we just go? Ellie finally said, breaking the tense silence. I told Mom I'd be back before dinner. The shopping trip that followed was quiet and strained, filled with brief, polite exchanges that lacked any of the warmth their outings once carried. Daniel attempted several times to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, but Ellie responded with short, guarded answers, her mind clearly elsewhere, her patience visibly thinning with every passing minute. When he finally dropped her back home, Ellie paused at the car door before stepping out, turning back to face her father one final time. Noah used to think you were the best dad in the world, she said quietly. He doesn't think that anymore. And I think, if you're being honest with yourself, you already know why. She stepped out of the car without waiting for a response, walking briskly toward the house, leaving Daniel alone in the driveway, with the weight of his daughter's words settling heavily over him. He sat in the car for several long minutes after she disappeared inside, staring blankly through the windshield at the house he used to call home, feeling, for the first time since he had left, the true magnitude of what he stood to lose beginning to take shape in his understanding, though he still lacked the courage, or perhaps simply the willingness, to change course before it was too late. That night, back at the apartment, Vanessa greeted him with news of an exciting opportunity, a chance to join friends on a holiday trip abroad that she had already tentatively agreed to on his behalf. It'll be wonderful, she said, scrolling through resort photographs on her phone with visible excitement. Just the two of us, somewhere warm, away from all this stress. Daniel looked at the photographs without truly seeing them, his mind still lingering on his daughter's quiet, devastating words in the driveway. Vanessa, he said slowly, the holidays are usually when I spend more time with the kids. Vanessa's expression shifted subtly, her enthusiasm dimming into something more guarded. I just thought, she said carefully, that since things have been so tense with them lately, maybe a break would actually be good for everyone. Daniel considered her words, and though some small part of him recognized the flaw in this reasoning, the larger, more familiar part of him, the part conditioned over recent months to avoid conflict with Vanessa at nearly any cost, found himself slowly nodding along, agreeing to yet another arrangement that would pull him further away from the children who needed him most. Later that night, lying awake beside Vanessa's sleeping form, Daniel stared at the ceiling, replaying his daughter's words over and over in his mind. Noah used to think you were the best dad in the world. He doesn't think that anymore. For the first time since leaving his family, Daniel felt something uncomfortably close to fear, a quiet, growing recognition that the life he had built with Vanessa, however glamorous and effortless it appeared on the surface, was slowly and steadily costing him something far more valuable than he had ever anticipated losing. The holiday trip abroad, meant to be a romantic escape for Daniel and Vanessa, ended up revealing cracks neither of them had expected to confront so directly. They sat across from each other at a beachside restaurant, the sound of waves rolling gently in the background, the kind of setting that should have felt effortlessly romantic. Instead, an uncomfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft clinking of silverware against plates. You've barely said anything all evening, Vanessa finally said, setting down her wine glass with a note of frustration. I'm sorry, Daniel replied, though his mind remained elsewhere, drifting back repeatedly to images of Noah spending his first Christmas morning without him, of Ellie helping her mother set the table for a holiday meal he was not present to share. I guess I'm just distracted. By the kids again, Vanessa said, not quite a question, more a tired observation. They're my children, Vanessa, Daniel said, a note of defensiveness creeping into his voice. I don't think that's something I should apologize for. I never asked you to apologize for loving them, Vanessa replied, her tone measured, but edged with something sharper beneath the surface. But I didn't expect that every single trip we take together would be shadowed by guilt over them. Daniel studied her carefully across the table, noticing, perhaps for the first time with real clarity, how little patience she seemed to hold for the ongoing responsibilities of his previous life, how easily she framed his children as obstacles rather than as people worth genuinely knowing. "They're not something I can just set aside," he said quietly. "They never will be." Vanessa sighed, glancing out toward the ocean before turning back to him. "I know that," she said, softer now. "I just thought things would feel lighter by now. I thought once the divorce was finalized, once some time had passed, we could actually start building something new, just for us." "I thought so too," Daniel admitted, and the honesty of his own words surprised him slightly, revealing a disappointment he had not fully allowed himself to acknowledge until this moment. The trip continued in much the same subdued tone, small tensions surfacing repeatedly beneath a thin veneer of vacation cheer, neither of them fully addressing the growing distance, quietly widening between them. Back home, the children spent their first Christmas without their father, in a quieter, more subdued celebration than years past, though Grace made every effort to create warmth and normalcy, despite the circumstances. Karen came over to help decorate, filling the house with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of old holiday songs, gently coaxing smiles from Noah and Ellie throughout the day. "This isn't so bad," Noah admitted quietly that evening, sitting beside his mother on the couch as they watched a holiday movie together. "It's different, but it's not so bad." Grace squeezed her son's shoulder gently, grateful for the small, steady progress she had noticed in him over recent weeks. A gradual return of warmth and lightness that had felt entirely absent just a month earlier. Ellie, seated on the floor nearby, glanced up from her sketchbook, where she had been quietly working on a new painting, something abstract and colorful, entirely unlike the darker, more subdued pieces she had created in the weeks immediately following the divorce. "I think," Ellie said thoughtfully, "we're figuring out how to be okay without him." Grace looked at her daughter with quiet pride, recognizing in Ellie's words not bitterness, but a hard-won resilience that had been slowly built through months of difficult adjustment. "I think you're right," she said softly. When Daniel returned from his trip and reached out to schedule the next visit with his children, he found himself met with a new kind of hesitation from Ellie, one that felt less like anger and more like quiet detachment. "We're busy this weekend," Ellie said over the phone, her tone polite but distant. "Maybe next time." "Ellie, I really want to see you both," Daniel said, a note of genuine concern entering his voice for the first time in weeks. "I know," Ellie replied simply, "but we've been busy building our own routine here, Dad. It's been good for us." Daniel felt an unfamiliar chill settle over him at his daughter's words, a quiet recognition that something fundamental had shifted, that his children were no longer waiting anxiously by the window for his arrival, no longer holding their breath in anticipation of his presence. They had begun, slowly and steadily, to move forward without him. "What about Noah?" Daniel asked. "Is he there? Can I talk to him?" There was a brief pause before Ellie answered. "He said he's not ready to talk right now," she said carefully. "He'll come around eventually, but right now, he just needs some space." The call ended shortly after, leaving Daniel standing alone in his apartment, staring at the phone in his hand, feeling the weight of his children's growing independence settle over him with unexpected heaviness. That evening, Vanessa found him sitting quietly on the balcony, staring out at the city lights without truly seeing them. "Everything okay?" she asked, joining him outside. "I don't know," Daniel admitted honestly. "I think I'm losing them, Vanessa. Slowly, but I really think I am." Vanessa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, though her words, when they came, carried less reassurance than he had hoped for. "Kids go through phases," she said. "They'll come back around eventually. Try not to stress about it too much. We have our own life to focus on too." Daniel nodded slowly, though something about her response left him feeling more isolated rather than comforted, a quiet recognition forming that Vanessa's understanding of his relationship with his children remained shallow, more concerned with maintaining the ease of their own life together than with the genuine pain he felt at watching his family slip further away. In the weeks that followed, this pattern deepened. Visits grew shorter and less frequent. Phone calls went unanswered more often than not. Ellie, in particular, began asserting a quiet but unmistakable independence, choosing increasingly to prioritize time with her mother, her friends, and her own personal pursuits, over scheduled visits with her father. One afternoon, Daniel arrived unannounced at the house, hoping to surprise his children with an impromptu outing, only to find Grace answering the door alone. "They're not here," Grace said simply. "Ellie's at an art exhibition with friends, and Noah's staying overnight at a friend's house. You should have called first." "I wanted to surprise them," Daniel said, his disappointment evident. Grace studied him for a long moment, her expression not unkind, but carrying the quiet, hard-earned wisdom of someone who had weathered significant pain and emerged with clearer eyes. "Daniel," she said gently, "you can't just show up expecting things to be the way they used to be. They've built new routines, new comforts. You have to actually be present, consistently, if you want to be part of their lives again." Daniel absorbed her words in silence, recognizing the truth in them even as he struggled to fully accept the reality they described. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted quietly, an honesty he rarely allowed himself these days. "I can't answer that for you," Grace replied, "but I can tell you this much. Children forgive far more easily than adults expect, but only if the person asking for forgiveness truly shows up, again and again, without excuses." She closed the door gently, leaving Daniel standing alone on the porch, the same porch he had once considered simply another part of his everyday life, now feeling instead like the threshold of a life he had carelessly left behind, a threshold he was no longer certain he still had the right to cross. Spring brought with it an unexpected turn that Daniel had not anticipated when he first chose the glamorous, effortless life he believed Vanessa offered him. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a bank statement, left carelessly open on the kitchen counter one morning, revealing a series of purchases and withdrawals that far exceeded what Daniel understood their shared finances to allow. He stared at the numbers for a long moment, before Vanessa emerged from the bedroom, immediately noticing his troubled expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, though something in her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "Vanessa," Daniel said carefully, "this account shows almost $4,000 in purchases I don't recognize." Vanessa's expression shifted quickly from concern to defensiveness. "I've been helping my sister," she said smoothly. "She's going through a rough patch financially. I didn't think it was a big deal." $4,000 isn't a small thing," Daniel replied, feeling a familiar unease settling into his chest, an unease that had been slowly accumulating over recent months without him fully acknowledging its source. "We talked about being careful with money, especially with everything going on. I didn't realize I needed permission to help my own family," Vanessa said sharply, turning away from him toward the kitchen window. Daniel studied her back for a long moment, noticing, with a clarity that felt almost unfamiliar, how quickly her tone shifted whenever questioned. How easily conversations about responsibility turned into arguments about control. He thought suddenly of Grace, of how transparent she had always been about their finances throughout their marriage, of how differently disagreements between them had once unfolded, with honesty rather than defensiveness. "I'm not trying to control you," Daniel said quietly. "I just think we should be honest with each other about money, especially now." Vanessa turned back to face him, her expression softening slightly, though something calculated remained behind her eyes. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry. I should have told you first." The apology, though offered, felt hollow to Daniel, in a way that unsettled him more than the initial disagreement itself. He found himself, in the days that followed, noticing small inconsistencies he had previously overlooked, moments where Vanessa's stories didn't quite align, where her explanations felt just slightly rehearsed. One evening, while Vanessa was out with friends, Daniel sat alone in the apartment, scrolling absently through old photographs on his phone. He came across a picture from years earlier, Grace laughing in their old kitchen, flour dusted across her cheek from an attempt at baking cookies with the children. The image struck him unexpectedly, a quiet ache rising in his chest, a longing not just for his children, but for the particular, unglamorous comfort of a life built on genuine partnership rather than curated appearances. His phone buzzed suddenly, a message from Ellie, the first she had sent in nearly 3 weeks. He opened it immediately, his heart quickening with a hope he hadn't expected to feel so intensely. "Noah's science fair is next Friday. He made it to regionals. Just thought you should know. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, recognizing it not as an invitation, but as information offered carefully, without expectation, from a daughter who had clearly grown cautious about extending hope toward her father. He replied immediately, "I'll be there. I promise." The reply came quickly, brief and guarded. "Okay." That single word carried more weight than an entire paragraph might have, a quiet reminder of how thoroughly his previous broken promises had eroded the trust his children once extended so freely. When Friday arrived, Daniel found himself facing an unexpected obstacle. Vanessa had scheduled a dinner with important business contacts, an event she insisted required his presence. "This could be a huge opportunity," she explained, adjusting her earrings in the mirror as she prepared for the evening. "These connections could really help us financially." "Vanessa, I promised Noah I'd be at his science fair tonight," Daniel said, his voice firmer than it had been in months. "I already broke that promise once. I'm not doing it again." Vanessa turned to face him, clearly surprised by the resolve in his tone. "Daniel, this dinner has been planned for weeks. I can't just cancel." "Then go without me," Daniel said simply. "I need to be there for my son." For a long moment, Vanessa said nothing, studying him, with an expression that mixed frustration with something closer to genuine surprise, as if she were seeing, perhaps for the first time, a version of Daniel she had not previously encountered, one capable of prioritizing something above her expectations. "Fine," she finally said, her tone clipped. "Go to your science fair. I'll handle tonight on my own." Daniel arrived at the school gymnasium just as the science fair was beginning, scanning the crowded room until he spotted Noah standing nervously beside his project, a detailed model demonstrating renewable energy concepts that had clearly taken considerable effort and care. "Dad?" Noah said, surprise evident in his voice as Daniel approached. "You actually came." "Of course I came," Daniel said, feeling a lump rise unexpectedly in his throat at the genuine shock in his son's expression. "I wouldn't miss this." Noah studied his father for a long moment, as if verifying the sincerity of his presence, before allowing himself to fully believe it. "The judges are coming around soon," he said finally, a small, cautious smile beginning to form. "Want to see what I made?" For the next hour, Daniel listened attentively as Noah explained his project in careful detail, feeling something warm and long forgotten stirring within him, a genuine connection with his son that had been slowly starved over recent months of distraction and absence. Ellie arrived partway through the evening, having come directly from her art class, and paused in surprise upon seeing her father standing attentively beside Noah's project. "You came," she said quietly, studying her father with an expression that mixed cautious hope with lingering skepticism. "I told you I would," Daniel said. "You've told us that before," Ellie replied, though her tone carried less bitterness than it once had, softened perhaps by the simple, undeniable fact of his presence tonight. "I know," Daniel admitted honestly, "and I'm sorry for all the times I didn't follow through. I really am." Ellie studied him carefully, searching his face for the sincerity she had learned, painfully, not to take for granted. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, at least partially, and she allowed a small, genuine smile to form. "Noah's project is really good," she said, changing the subject slightly, though the shift felt less like avoidance and more like cautious acceptance. "It really is," Daniel agreed, watching his son proudly explaining his work to a panel of judges nearby. "He's incredibly smart." "He gets that from Mom," Ellie said simply, though there was no malice in the observation, only a quiet, matter-of-fact truth that Daniel found himself unable to dispute. Later that evening, as Daniel drove his children home, a comfortable, if still slightly guarded, silence settled over the car, a marked contrast to the tense, strained atmosphere of their previous outings. For the first time in months, Daniel felt something resembling hope, a quiet recognition that perhaps, with consistent effort and genuine presence, the distance between himself and his children might slowly begin to narrow. But when he returned to the apartment later that night, he found Vanessa waiting for him, with an expression that immediately dissolved the fragile warmth he had carried home from the science fair. "I hope it was worth it," she said coldly, "missing an opportunity that could have genuinely helped our future, for a school project." Daniel studied her for a long moment, recognizing, with a clarity that felt both painful and overdue, the true nature of the choice repeatedly being asked of him. A choice between the curated, glamorous life Vanessa offered and the messier, more meaningful connection he was slowly rebuilding with his children. It was worth it, he said simply, the quiet certainty in his voice surprising even himself. Vanessa's expression hardened further, though she said nothing more that evening, retreating instead into a cold, deliberate silence that Daniel recognized, with growing unease, as a preview of conflicts yet to come. The argument that finally broke the fragile peace between Daniel and Vanessa began, ironically, over something as simple as a weekend visit. Ellie had invited her father to attend a small art showcase at her school, one of the first times she had proactively reached out with an invitation, rather than responding to his repeated requests. Daniel accepted immediately, grateful for the small but meaningful gesture of trust his daughter was extending. "I already told my friends we'd be at the Coastal House this weekend," Vanessa said, frustration evident in her voice as Daniel explained his plans. "You can't just cancel on people because your daughter has some school event." "It's not just some school event, Vanessa," Daniel said, his patience visibly thinning after months of similar conversations. "Ellie invited me herself. Do you understand how important that is, given everything?" "I understand you're choosing them over us, again," Vanessa replied sharply. "There is no them or us," Daniel said, his voice rising slightly with a frustration that had been quietly building for weeks. "They're my children. That was never supposed to be a competition." "Wasn't it?" Vanessa shot back. "You left your entire family for this relationship, Daniel. Don't act surprised when maintaining both sides feels complicated." The words landed with unexpected force, and Daniel stared at her, absorbing the true implication behind her statement. "Are you saying you expected me to slowly step back from my kids?" he asked quietly, disbelief evident in his tone. Vanessa hesitated, clearly recognizing she had revealed more than intended. "I'm saying," she said carefully, backtracking slightly, "that relationships require priorities, and I don't think it's unreasonable to want to be one of yours." "You are one of my priorities," Daniel said. "But you can't be my only priority, not at the cost of my children." The argument continued late into the night, circling repeatedly around the same painful themes. Vanessa's growing impatience with the demands of blended family life, Daniel's slowly awakening recognition of the costs his choices had placed upon his children. Neither fully resolved the tension, though something had undeniably shifted between them, a crack widening that neither seemed able, or entirely willing, to repair. The following weekend, Daniel attended Ellie's art showcase as promised, arriving early, staying attentively throughout the entire evening, offering genuine praise for his daughter's work. A series of paintings, exploring themes of change and resilience that Daniel recognized, with a mixture of pride and quiet heartbreak, as deeply personal reflections of the past year's upheaval. "This one," Ellie said, guiding her father toward a particular painting, an abstract piece featuring fractured, overlapping shapes slowly resolving into a single, cohesive image. "This one is about rebuilding something after it breaks." Daniel studied the painting carefully, recognizing in its layered complexity something of his daughter's own journey over the past year. "It's beautiful, Ellie," he said softly. "Really beautiful." "Thanks," Ellie said, a genuine smile forming, the first unguarded smile Daniel had seen from his daughter in many months. "I'm glad you came." "I'm glad you asked me," Daniel replied honestly. Later that evening, as they walked together toward the parking lot, Ellie glanced sideways at her father, with an expression that mixed curiosity with cautious openness. "Is everything okay with you and Vanessa?" she asked. "You seem different lately." Daniel considered his answer carefully before responding. "Things have been complicated," he admitted honestly. "I think I've been realizing some things I probably should have recognized earlier." Ellie nodded slowly, absorbing his admission without judgment, though something in her expression suggested she understood far more than her father might have expected. "You know," she said quietly, "Mom never asked us to choose sides, even when things were really hard. She always said you were still our dad, no matter what happened between you two." Daniel felt a lump rise unexpectedly in his throat at his daughter's words. "Your mother," he said slowly, "is a remarkable person." "Yeah," Ellie agreed simply. "She really is." That night, when Daniel returned to the apartment, he found Vanessa waiting for him, with a look of cool detachment that had become increasingly familiar in recent weeks. "How was the showcase?" she asked, her tone carrying little genuine curiosity. "It was wonderful," Daniel said honestly. "Ellie did an incredible job." Vanessa nodded absently, scrolling through her phone without looking up. "That's nice," she said flatly. Daniel studied her for a long moment, recognizing with increasing clarity the widening gap between the woman he had once believed offered him excitement and passion, and the increasingly cold, distant partner she had become, whenever his children's needs intersected with her own preferences. Over the following weeks, tension between Daniel and Vanessa continued to escalate, disagreements arising more frequently over matters both large and small, each argument circling back inevitably to the same underlying issue, the ongoing, unresolved question of where his children fit into the life he had built with her. Meanwhile, Ellie and Noah, sensing the subtle shift in their father's behavior, began cautiously extending more frequent invitations, testing the waters of a relationship they had spent months protecting themselves against relying upon too heavily. Daniel, in turn, made increasingly consistent efforts to attend, to follow through, to genuinely engage rather than simply appear. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel arrived to pick up his children for a simple outing to the park, something ordinary and unremarkable, that nonetheless carried significant weight, given the strained history between them. Grace answered the door, studying him for a long moment, with an expression that had softened somewhat over recent weeks, though it remained cautiously guarded. "They've mentioned you've been more present lately," she said simply, neither praising nor criticizing, merely observing. "I've been trying," Daniel said honestly. "I know it doesn't erase everything that happened, but I want to keep trying." Grace studied him carefully before responding. "Consistency matters more than intentions, Daniel," she said. "Just remember that." "I will," Daniel said, and for the first time in many months, he found himself genuinely believing his own words. That evening, after returning the children home, Daniel drove back to the apartment slowly, turning Grace's words over carefully in his mind. Consistency matters more than intentions. He thought of Vanessa waiting for him at home, increasingly resentful of the time and attention he devoted toward rebuilding his relationship with his children. And he thought, too, of the quiet, unexpected joy he had felt watching Noah explain his science project, watching Ellie proudly present her artwork, small moments of genuine connection that no amount of glamour or excitement with Vanessa had ever managed to replicate. When he arrived home, Vanessa was waiting for him in the living room, her expression tight, with barely restrained frustration. "We need to talk," she said flatly, echoing, though she likely didn't realize it, the very words Daniel had once used to shatter his own marriage months earlier. Daniel sat down slowly across from her, sensing immediately the gravity of the conversation about to unfold. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's talk." "I don't think this is working anymore," Vanessa said, her voice tight with a frustration that had clearly been building for some time. "I feel like I'm constantly competing with your old life, and honestly, I'm tired of coming in second." Daniel absorbed her words carefully, recognizing, with a strange mixture of sadness and clarity, that the relationship he had once believed represented excitement and renewal had slowly revealed itself to be something far more shallow, something incapable of accommodating the genuine responsibilities and love he still held for his children. "Vanessa," he said slowly, "I think you're right. I think we both knew this wasn't sustainable, even if neither of us wanted to admit it." Vanessa studied him for a long moment, something like relief, mixing uncomfortably with resentment in her expression. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said quietly. "I think," Daniel said, his voice carrying a quiet, hard-earned honesty. "I already knew what I was looking for. I just didn't recognize it until I nearly lost it completely." The conversation ended there, without further argument, both of them recognizing, in their own ways, that whatever connection had once drawn them together had eroded steadily, beneath the weight of choices and consequences neither had fully anticipated when their relationship first began. The morning after Daniel and Vanessa's relationship finally ended, Daniel woke alone in the apartment for the first time in nearly a year, the silence around him feeling both unfamiliar and, in a strange way, clarifying. He spent the following weeks in a quiet, reflective solitude, sorting through the wreckage of choices he had made, choices that had cost him nearly everything he once valued, in pursuit of something he now recognized as hollow, a glamorous illusion that had ultimately offered him far less than the ordinary, imperfect life he had left behind. He reached out to Grace cautiously during this period, not seeking reconciliation of the romantic kind, but rather requesting her guidance on how best to continue rebuilding his relationship with their children. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were," he told her one afternoon, sitting across from her at a coffee shop they had agreed upon as neutral ground. "I just want to know how to keep showing up for Noah and Ellie, consistently, the way they deserve." Grace studied him carefully, her expression measured, neither warm nor hostile, simply thoughtful. "Show up," she said simply. "Every time. Not because it's convenient, not because it makes you feel good about yourself, but because they need to know, beyond any doubt, that you'll be there." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing her words with a seriousness that had been notably absent during the earlier months of his departure. "I will," he said. "I promise." "You've made promises before," Grace said, not unkindly, but with the quiet honesty of someone unwilling to offer false reassurance. "I know," Daniel admitted, "but I intend to keep this one." Meanwhile, Grace's own life had continued its steady, quiet transformation. Her work at the design studio had expanded significantly, and she now managed a small team of her own, her creative instincts and steady leadership earning her increasing respect among colleagues and clients alike. "You've really found your footing here," Priya told her one afternoon, reviewing a particularly successful project Grace had led. "It's inspiring to watch, honestly." Grace smiled, genuinely pleased by the observation. "It's been a journey," she admitted. "But I think I finally feel like myself again, maybe even more myself than I did before all of this happened." At home, Ellie had grown increasingly confident in her artistic pursuits, securing a small but meaningful feature in a local gallery exhibition, an opportunity that filled her with genuine pride and validation after months of channeling her pain into creative expression. "I can't believe they actually chose my painting," Ellie said excitedly one evening, showing her mother the formal invitation to the gallery opening. "I can," Grace said warmly, pulling her daughter into a proud embrace. "You've worked incredibly hard, sweetheart. This is exactly what you deserve." Noah, too, had continued to flourish, his early success at the regional science fair leading to further opportunities, including an invitation to a specialized summer program focused on renewable energy research, an achievement that filled him with a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. "They said I could actually build a working prototype this summer," Noah told his mother excitedly, unable to contain his enthusiasm. "A real one, that actually generates power." "That's incredible, Noah," Grace said, beaming with pride at her son's evident excitement, a stark contrast to the withdrawn, quiet boy he had been just months earlier. As the family slowly continued rebuilding their sense of stability and joy, Daniel made consistent, deliberate efforts to remain genuinely present in his children's lives, attending Ellie's gallery opening with visible pride, supporting Noah's growing passion for science with attentive interest, arriving early, and staying fully engaged at every scheduled visit, slowly rebuilding, through patient consistency, the trust he had so carelessly damaged months earlier. "You've been different lately," Ellie observed one afternoon, as she and her father walked together through a local park, a simple, ordinary outing that nonetheless carried significant meaning, given their strained history. "More present, I mean." "I've been trying," Daniel said honestly. "I know it doesn't erase what happened before. But I want you and Noah to know that I'm here now, and I intend to stay here." Ellie studied her father carefully, searching his expression for the sincerity she had once struggled to find in him. "I believe you," she said finally, her tone carrying a cautious but genuine warmth that had been notably absent for many months. "It's taken a while, but I believe you." Daniel felt a wave of quiet gratitude wash over him at his daughter's words, recognizing them as hard-earned, a trust rebuilt through patient, consistent effort, rather than empty promises or grand gestures. Later that evening, as Daniel drove home alone, he found himself reflecting on the profound shift that had occurred within his family over the past year, a shift born not from the glamorous excitement he had once believed necessary for happiness, but from quiet resilience, patient rebuilding, and the steady, unglamorous work of genuine love and responsibility. He thought of Grace, thriving in ways he had never imagined during their marriage, discovering strength and purpose he had unintentionally overshadowed during their years together. He thought of Ellie, channeling her pain into powerful, meaningful art, and Noah, rediscovering joy and confidence through genuine passion and effort. And he thought, finally, of himself, slowly learning, through significant loss and difficult reflection, the true meaning of presence, consistency, and unconditional love. The road ahead, he understood clearly now, would require continued patience, continued humility, and continued effort. But for the first time in many months, Daniel felt genuinely hopeful about the possibility of rebuilding meaningful, authentic relationships with his children, relationships built not upon glamour or convenience, but upon the steady, quiet foundation of genuine presence and unconditional love. As he pulled into the driveway of his apartment that evening, alone but no longer lost, Daniel allowed himself, for the first time in many months, a quiet, genuine sense of hope for the future that awaited him. A future he now understood would be built not through grand gestures or fleeting excitement, but through the patient, consistent work of simply showing up, again and again, for the people who truly mattered most. A year had passed since the night Grace first saw Vanessa Cole's name glowing on Daniel's phone screen in the darkness of their old bedroom, and the family that emerged from that painful beginning looked, in many ways, unrecognizable from the fractured group that had once sat frozen in shock in their living room. Ellie stood proudly in front of her latest exhibition, an entire collection now dedicated to themes of transformation and resilience, drawing genuine praise from critics and visitors alike. She had grown into her voice as an artist, with a confidence that reflected the quiet strength she had absorbed from her mother throughout the most difficult months of her life. "I'm really proud of you," Daniel told her, standing beside her at the gallery opening, admiring the collection that told, in vivid color and careful composition, the story of a family that had broken apart and slowly, painstakingly, found new ways to heal. "Thanks, Dad," Ellie said warmly, genuine affection evident in her voice, affection that had been rebuilt slowly, deliberately, through months of consistent presence and patient effort. Noah, now taller and more confident than the withdrawn boy who once cried quietly in his room, had successfully built his renewable energy prototype over the summer, earning recognition at a national science competition that left him beaming with pride and newfound self-assurance. "Dad, you have to see this," Noah said excitedly, pulling his father toward a small demonstration table where his working model generated small, steady sparks of clean energy. "I actually built something that works." "You've always been capable of incredible things, Noah," Daniel said, genuine pride evident in his voice. "I'm sorry it took me so long to really show up and see that." "You're here now," Noah said simply, offering his father a warm, forgiving smile that spoke volumes about the patient, consistent effort Daniel had invested over the past year in rebuilding trust. Grace, meanwhile, had continued to flourish both personally and professionally, recently promoted to lead an entire creative division at her design studio, her confidence and leadership blossoming in ways that surprised even herself. She had also begun cautiously exploring a new relationship with a kind, steady man named Julian Marsh, someone whose quiet reliability and genuine warmth offered a comforting contrast to the turbulence of the previous year. "You seem happy," Daniel observed one afternoon, as they both attended a school event together, maintaining the respectful, cooperative co-parenting relationship they had carefully built over recent months. "I am happy," Grace said simply, and there was no bitterness in her words, only a quiet, hard-earned contentment that reflected genuine healing rather than mere resignation. "I'm glad," Daniel said honestly, and he meant it fully, recognizing, with clear eyes now, the genuine strength and resilience Grace had demonstrated throughout their family's most difficult trial. As for Vanessa, Daniel had heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved on quickly to another relationship, one that seemed to mirror many of the same patterns that had ultimately doomed her time with Daniel, patterns of glamour and excitement that lacked the deeper foundation necessary for genuine, lasting partnership. Reflecting on the past year, Daniel understood clearly now the profound lesson his family's painful journey had taught him. He had once believed that happiness required excitement, glamour, and passion untethered from responsibility. But the true happiness he now experienced with his children came not from grand gestures or fleeting excitement, but from the steady, unglamorous work of showing up, consistently and genuinely, day after day. He thought back to that first devastating night, to Grace's quiet strength in the face of his betrayal, to Ellie's fierce, protective anger, to Noah's heartbroken confusion, and he recognized now, with humility he had lacked previously, how deeply his choices had impacted the people he loved most, and how much patient, consistent effort had been required to slowly rebuild what he had so carelessly broken. Standing now among his children at Ellie's gallery, watching Noah proudly demonstrate his prototype to interested visitors, watching Grace laugh warmly with her new partner nearby, Daniel felt a profound, quiet gratitude settle over him. Gratitude not for the glamorous life he had once believed he wanted, but for the genuine, hard-earned relationships he had slowly rebuilt through patience, humility, and unconditional love. His children had not simply chosen their mother over him in some bitter contest of loyalty. They had chosen authenticity over illusion, consistency over convenience, genuine love over fleeting excitement, values Grace had quietly embodied throughout even the darkest days of their family's most painful chapter. And in choosing those values, Ellie and Noah had ultimately given their father the greatest gift of all, a second chance to become the kind of parent and the kind of person he had always hoped, deep down, he could truly be. As the gallery event drew to a close that evening, Daniel walked alongside his children toward the parking lot, the three of them talking easily, laughing together in a way that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. He glanced back once at the gallery, at the colorful, powerful artwork depicting his family's journey from devastation toward healing, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, genuinely at peace. The road ahead remained uncertain, as all futures inevitably are, but Daniel understood now, with clarity he had once sorely lacked, that genuine happiness would never again be found in fleeting beauty or glamorous illusion, but in the quiet, steady, deeply meaningful work of showing up, fully and consistently, for the people who mattered most. And for the first time since that painful night so many months ago, Daniel Whitfield finally understood exactly what he had almost lost, and exactly what it would take, every single day moving forward, to make sure he never lost it again.